Richard fell to his knees so hard that dust flew up around him. He did not care, not about his shining white caftan, not about the red cap that had slipped from his head, not about the villagers standing behind him in stunned silence. His two hands were pressed against the fresh grave in front of the old mud house, and his whole body shook like a man standing inside a storm. "Mama, Mama Bisi, please," he cried, his voice breaking in the middle. "Please come back. I am here now. I am here. I made a mistake. Mama, forgive me." But the grave did not answer. Only the wind moved, a dry village wind that lifted loose sand, brushed the old zinc roof above the mud house, and carried the smell of earth and sorrow across the compound. Richard stared at the wooden cross planted at the head of the grave. "A Madame Bisi Olalekan, a loving mother, rest in peace." He blinked once, then twice, as if the words would change, as if somebody would laugh and tell him it was not real, as if his mother would open the front door, tie her wrapper tighter around her waist, and say in that soft, tired voice of hers, "Richard, why are you crying outside like a child? Come in. Food is ready." But nothing happened. No voice, no footsteps, no mother. His shoulders bent lower, he dropped his forehead onto the grave and began to cry like a little boy. Not the quiet crying of a rich man trying to keep his pride. No, this was deep, ugly crying. The kind that comes when the heart finally breaks open after pretending for too many years that it is still whole. Behind him, a few men from the village stood with folded arms, and two old women in faded Ankara scarves whispered to each other. A group of children who had first run there out of curiosity had gone silent after seeing the way Richard cried. Nobody mocked him, nobody moved, even those who were angry with him felt something heavy in their chest. An old man cleared his throat. It was Parsul, the man who used to sit with Richard's mother under the mango tree every evening. "We called you," he said quietly. Richard did not lift his head. "We called you when she first became weak. We called you when she stopped going to the stream. We called you when she began coughing blood." Richard squeezed the sand in his fist. Still, he said nothing. Parsul's voice grew firmer. "We called you when she asked for you in the night." That made Richard lift his face. His eyes were red already, and his cheeks were wet. Dust clung to his skin. What did she say?" he asked. The old man looked away for a moment, as if the memory hurt him too. "She said, 'Tell my son I am not angry. Let him come when he can.'" Richard let out a sound that did not even sound human. It was half cry, half groan. He hit his chest once with his fist. "No," he whispered. "No." Another voice spoke this time. It was Mama Tunda, his mother's neighbor, a small woman with a sharp tongue but a good heart. "She waited for you," she said. "Even when people told her to rest and forget you, she defended you. She kept saying, 'My son is busy in Lagos. My son will come.'" Richard swallowed hard. His throat hurt. He remembered the calls, so many calls, calls he ignored, calls he cut short. Calls that came when he was inside expensive restaurants in Victoria Island, when he was driving his black Range Rover through Lekki, when he was lying beside Loretta in their large bedroom while the air conditioner hummed like there was no pain anywhere in the world. He remembered each one now, too late, too clearly. At first he had promised to visit, then Loretta would sigh and roll her eyes. "Your mother again." That was how she always said it. Not Mama, not your poor old mother. Just your mother again, with a cold face, like Madame Bisi was a problem that kept interrupting their good life. Richard had not noticed when patience turned into distance. He had not noticed when distance turned into shame, and he had not noticed when shame turned into betrayal. It had happened slowly, in polished houses, in expensive clothes, in quiet compromises. That was the wicked part. Most tragedies do not begin with a gunshot. Sometimes they begin with a wife saying, "Just this once, stay with me." And then the next time she says it again, then again, until a man forgets the road back to his own mother's house. Richard looked up at the mud house in front of him. He had not stepped near it in years. The house looked smaller than he remembered. The walls were cracked. The old red zinc roof was rusted and bent at one corner. The front wooden door looked weak, like one strong push could bring it down. This? This was where his mother had lived while he slept on king-sized beds in Lagos. This was where she had coughed and suffered and waited. The thought cut him so deeply that he had to hold his stomach. He began crying again, a younger man in the crowd. Mikunle spoke with open anger. "You should cry," he said. "Cry well. Because when she needed medicine, we contributed money. When she needed food, women from this village brought soup. When she fainted in the market, it was not you that carried her. It was us." "Kunle," Parsul warned gently, but Kunle shook his head. "No, let him hear it. Let him hear everything." Richard did not argue. He could not. Because every word was true. He remembered the last big fight he had with his mother on the phone. Madame Bisi had called him on a Sunday afternoon. He was in Aja then, at a housewarming party with Loretta's friends. Loud music, laughter, people taking photos with wine glasses in their hands. He almost did not pick the call, but he did. "Richard," his mother had said, her voice small but warm. "My son, when are you coming home?" It has been long. He had stepped away from the noise and frowned. "Mama, I'm busy." There had been a short silence. Then she asked, "Busy for 5 years?" He still remembered how that question hit him. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. Before he could answer, Loretta had walked up behind him, wearing a gold dress, smelling of perfume and impatience. She hissed loudly enough for Madame Bisi to hear through the phone. "Is that woman monitoring you again?" Richard had looked back at her, embarrassed. "Mama, I'll call you later," he had muttered. But Madame Bisi had not let him go. "Richard," she said, and this time her voice was shaking, "I am your mother. Why do you fear your wife more than your own conscience?" He had gone cold. Loretta folded her arms. "What did she say?" she snapped. Well, Richard lowered his voice. "Mama, don't start." "No," Madame Bisi had replied, "it is not me who started this. Since that woman entered your life, you stopped remembering where you came from. You stopped sounding like my son." That was when Loretta snatched the phone from him. Richard could still remember the scene as if it were playing in front of him now. The laughter at the party, the clinking of glasses, the smell of grilled meat in the air. And Loretta smiling the way dangerous people smile when they are about to wound someone. "Listen carefully, Mama," she said into the phone. "Leave my husband alone. Every time something goes wrong in your life, you call him. You act like a saint, but I know women like you. You want control. You village women always do." Richard had taken the phone back, but not before hearing his mother's stunned silence. Then Loretta whispered the words that poisoned everything. "She is a witch, Richard. Can't you see it? Since she started calling, have you had peace?" He should have shouted. He should have ended it there. He should have defended his mother. Instead, he stood still. That silence became his sin. A few days later, when Madame Bisi called again, Richard answered with anger that did not belong to him. "Mama, stop disturbing my home," he had said. There was a long, painful pause on the line. Then his mother asked only one question. "So you too believe I am a witch?" Richard closed his eyes now as the memory crushed him. He had not said yes, but he had not said no, and sometimes the cruelest answer is silence. He opened his eyes and looked at the grave again. "Mama," he whispered, trembling, "I did not protect you." The women standing nearby began to wipe their eyes. Even those who had come ready to judge him were beginning to see something terrible, not just a wicked son, but a broken man finally meeting the truth he had avoided for years. Then, from the far end of the compound, the sound of a motorcycle stopped. Heads turned. A man climbed down and walked in, holding a brown envelope. He was dressed in a black shirt and dark trousers, dusty from the road from town. "Who is Richard Olalekan?" he asked. Richard slowly stood up. His legs were weak. "I am Richard." The man looked at him carefully, then at the grave, then back at him. "I have been looking for you since morning." "I came from Ibadan High Court." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "Court." Richard frowned. "What is it?" The man opened the envelope and pulled out some papers. His face was serious. "Sir, this concerns your former wife, Loretta." At the mention of her name, something hard passed through Richard's chest. Former wife. Even now it sounded unreal. The man continued, We have new information about the money, the properties, and the international transfer she made before fleeing the country. Richard's breathing changed. The villagers exchanged looks. Parsul stepped closer. The man held out the paper. "But before I hand this over, there is something else you need to know," he said. "It concerns a statement Loretta made about your mother before she ran away." Richard froze. Everything around him suddenly felt still. The wind, the whispers, the dusty compound, the grave. All of it. His fingers shook as he reached for the paper. "What statement?" he asked. The man looked him straight in the eye. And what he said next made Richard's blood run cold. Richard's fingers trembled as he collected the paper. For a moment, he did not open it. It felt heavy, not because of the weight of the paper, but because of what it carried. Truth. The kind of truth that does not fix anything. The kind that only shows you how badly you have already lost. "What did she say?" Richard asked again, his voice low, almost afraid. The man from the court did not rush. He glanced at the villagers, then back at Richard. "She made a statement before she left Nigeria," he said carefully. "It was recorded during an investigation into financial fraud and illegal transfers." Richard's chest tightened. Loretta, fraud, money. It all sounded familiar now, too familiar. "But that is not the part that concerns you the most," the man added. Richard swallowed. "Then what does?" The man hesitated for just 1 second, then he said it. "She admitted that your mother was never a witch." The words landed like a blow. Richard blinked. Once, twice. "No," he whispered, shaking his head slowly. "No, I already knew that." But the man was not finished. "She also admitted," he continued, "that she lied about your mother to push her out of your life." The ground beneath Richard's feet felt unsteady. A low murmur spread through the villagers. Kunla stepped forward, his anger rising again. "You mean she made everything up?" he snapped. The man nodded. "Yes. According to her statement, she said, and I quote, 'I knew if I called the old woman a witch, Richard would slowly begin to fear her. And once fear enters, love begins to die.'" Silence. Deep, painful silence. Richard's hands began to shake harder. He remembered everything. The fear, the doubt, the way he had started avoiding his mother's calls, the way he had felt uncomfortable hearing her voice, the way he had slowly, quietly, pushed her away. Not because of anything she did, but because of a lie he allowed to grow, a lie he watered with his silence. His knees gave way again, and he dropped back to the ground. "No," he said, louder this time. "No, no, no." His voice cracked. I called her a burden." His breath became uneven. "I told her not to come near my home. I told my own mother to stay away." He covered his face with both hands. "I believed it. I believed it." Behind him, the villagers stood in stunned disbelief. Mama Tundi shook her head slowly. "God will judge that woman," she whispered. Parsul sighed deeply, leaning on his walking stick. "This is why elders say, never allow a stranger to speak against your roots." But Richard could not hear them clearly anymore. His mind had gone back to moments he had ignored, moments that now returned with sharp clarity. He remembered the first time Loretta accused his mother. They had just moved into their new house in Lekki Phase 1. Everything was new, the marble floors, the white leather chairs, the soft lighting that made everything look perfect. Madame Bisi had visited once, just once. She wore her simple wrapper, her hair tied with a scarf, her feet dusty from the journey. She had stood at the entrance, smiling with pride. "Oh, my son, your house is beautiful," she had said. But Loretta did not smile. She looked Madame Bisi up and down. Then she leaned close to Richard and whispered, "Why didn't you tell her to change before coming here?" Richard had laughed nervously. "Mama, come in," he had said. But the visit did not last long. Madame Bisi barely touched anything. She sat carefully like she was afraid of breaking something. She kept smiling. But her eyes had noticed everything. The distance, the discomfort, the way Loretta avoided sitting close to her, the way the house, though big, did not feel like home anymore. That night, after Madame Bisi left, Loretta said it. "I don't like her." Richard frowned. She's my mother. Loretta crossed her arms. And I'm your wife. You have to choose peace. What does that mean? It means, she said slowly, that woman brings something negative. I feel it. I don't trust her. Richard laughed it off, at first, but then she kept saying it. Again. And again. Until one day she said the word that changed everything. She is a witch. Richard opened his eyes again. Tears streamed down his face. I let her poison me, he whispered. The man from the court stepped closer and gently placed the paper in Richard's hand. There is more, he said. Richard looked up weakly. More? The man nodded. She also stated that your mother tried to reach you through someone else. Richard froze. Who? The man flipped through the paper. A woman named Aisha. She runs a small provision shop near this village. Mama Tunda gasped. Aisha? That girl? Parsul nodded slowly. Yes. Aisha used to visit your mother often. Richard's heart began to pound. What happened? He asked quickly. The man read from the document. According to the statement, Madame Bisi sent Aisha to Lagos with a message for you. She wanted to see you. She said she was very sick. Richard's breath stopped. I never saw anyone. The man looked at him. Yes. Because your wife sent her away. What? The word came out like a cry. Loretta met Aisha at your gate, the man said. She told her you were not home, and warned her never to return. Richard stared at him. His ears rang, the world blurred. She sent her away? He repeated slowly. The man nodded. And she did not tell you. Something inside Richard broke again, this time deeper, worse. He grabbed his head. No, that's not possible. I would have gone. I would have come home. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Would he? Back then, with Loretta whispering in his ears, with his heart already turned away, would he have believed Aisha? Or would he have chased her away too? The answer came quietly, and it destroyed him. A soft voice spoke from the crowd. I was the one. Everyone turned. A young woman stepped forward slowly. She looked older now, but her face still held the same softness. It was Aisha. Richard stared at her. You? You came to Lagos? She nodded. Tears filled her eyes. I came with your mother's message. She gave me the little money she had for transport. She said, bring my son back to me. Richard's lips trembled. What? What happened? Aisha looked down. Your wife met me outside your gate. She didn't even let me step in. Richard clenched his fists. What did she say? Aisha swallowed. She said, whatever that old woman sent you to say, keep it to yourself. My husband has moved on from that life. A heavy silence fell again. Richard's chest rose and fell rapidly. And you believed her? He asked, his voice breaking. Aisha shook her head. I waited outside for hours. I thought you would come out. Richard closed his eyes. But you never did. A tear slipped down Aisha's cheek. So I went back and told your mother you were not around. Richard opened his eyes slowly. What did she say? Aisha's voice dropped to a whisper. She smiled. That one word cut deeper than anything else. She said, it's okay. My son must be very busy. Richard let out a broken sob. Behind him, even Kunli turned away, wiping his face quickly. The pain in the air was too much, too real. Richard fell forward again, his body shaking. I killed her, he whispered. I killed my own mother with my silence. No, Parsul said firmly, you made a mistake, a terrible one. But do not take the place of God. But Richard was not listening anymore. His mind had gone somewhere dark, somewhere full of regrets that could never be undone. The man from the court cleared his throat. There is one last thing, he said. Richard slowly lifted his head. What now? He asked weakly. The man looked at him with a serious expression. This statement, it was not made willingly at first. Richard frowned. What do you mean? The man held his gaze. Loretta only confessed after something happened to her, in the United States. The villagers leaned in slightly. Even the wind seemed to pause again. Richard's heart beat faster. What happened to her? The man's voice dropped. She said, "Everything she took from you started disappearing." Richard blinked. "What?" the man continued. "Money vanished. Investments failed. People she trusted betrayed her. And the man she ran away with turned out to be a fraud." A chill ran through the crowd. Mama Tunda crossed herself. Parsul looked toward the grave quietly. The man finished softly. She claimed it felt like something was following her, something she could not escape. Richard turned slowly and looked at his mother's grave. The wind blew again. Soft, cold, and for the first time since he arrived, fear entered his heart, not of witches, not of curses, but of something worse. Consequences. He swallowed hard. "Mama," he whispered. And just then, the old wooden door of the mud house creaked open behind him on its own. Slowly, quietly, as if someone, or something, had just stepped out. Richard turned sharply, his heart pounding, and what he saw standing inside the dark doorway made his blood run cold. Richard's heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Thump, thump, thump. The wooden door of the mud house stood half open, moving slightly as the wind passed through it. The inside was dark, too dark for afternoon light. Nobody had touched it. Nobody stood near it. Yet it had opened. Slowly, on its own. Richard swallowed hard. Who is there?" he called out, his voice unsteady. No answer. The villagers shifted behind him. Some stepped back a little. Others leaned forward, curious but uneasy. Mama Tunde whispered, "That door has not opened since she was buried." Parsul frowned deeply. "Maybe the wind," he said, but even his voice lacked full belief. Richard pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt weak, but something pulled him forward. Not courage. No, not really. Something else. Guilt, regret, the need to face what he had avoided for years. "I want to go inside," he said quietly. Kunle stepped forward quickly. "Are you sure?" Richard nodded. "I have to." There was a pause, then Parsul raised his hand. "Let him go," the old man said. "Some journeys, a man must walk alone." Richard took a slow step toward the house, then another. Each step felt heavy, like the ground itself did not want him there. The closer he got, the more details became clear. The walls were rough and cracked. The paint had long faded. And the small window beside the door had no glass, just a piece of cloth hanging loosely, moving with the wind. This was where his mother had lived, while he lived in comfort, while he forgot her. His chest tightened again. He reached the door. His hand hovered over it for a second. Then slowly, he pushed it open. The hinges creaked loudly. The sound echoed inside like a warning. Richard stepped in. The air inside the house was different. Still, heavy. Like it had been waiting for him. Dust floated in the thin beams of light that slipped through the small window. The room was simple. Painfully simple. A wooden chair, a small table, a woven mat on the floor. And at the far corner, a low bed made of old foam and thin cloth. Richard froze. That bed. That was where she slept. That was where she lay while she waited for him. He took a slow step forward. His eyes scanned the room. Every object felt like it had a story he had missed. On the table he saw a small metal plate. Beside it, a cup. Empty. Dry. His throat tightened. Was this how she ate? Was this all she had? He reached out and touched the table lightly. Dust covered his fingers. His chest rose sharply. "She lived like this," he whispered. Behind him, outside, the villagers remained silent. No one interrupted. No one entered. This moment belonged to him. And his pain. Richard moved toward the bed slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Then he saw it. A folded piece of cloth, carefully placed on the edge of the bed. He stopped. Something about it felt intentional, not random, not forgotten. Placed, waiting. On his hands shook as he reached for it. He unfolded the cloth slowly. And inside, there was a small envelope. His name was written on it. Richard. His breath caught. The handwriting. He knew it. He knew it immediately. His mother's handwriting. Simple, neat, familiar. His eyes filled with tears again. She She wrote to me, he whispered. His fingers trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. He unfolded it carefully. His vision blurred for a moment. He wiped his eyes quickly, then he began to read. My son, if you are reading this, it means God has finally brought you home. Richard's lips trembled. His knees felt weak again. He sat slowly on the edge of the bed, the same bed his mother had used. He kept reading. I do not know if I will still be alive when you come, but I want you to know something first. I am not angry with you. Richard let out a soft, broken sound. Tears dropped onto the paper. People may tell you many things about me. They may say I suffered. They may say I cried. They may even say you abandoned me. But I want you to hear my own voice. You are still my son, and I still love you. Richard shook his head slowly. No, Mama, he whispered, don't say that. I know the world you entered is different from the one that raised you. I know there are voices around you, voices that can confuse a man's heart. But no matter what anyone says, never forget who you are. Never forget where you come from. Richard pressed the letter against his chest for a second. His body shook. I forgot, he whispered. I forgot everything. If I did anything wrong to you, forgive me. And if I ever made you feel ashamed, forgive me. But my son, please, forgive yourself too. Richard froze. His breathing stopped for a moment. Forgive himself? How? How could he? I pray that one day you will come back. Not because I am dying, but because you remember me, because you remember love. And if that day comes, do not cry too much. Instead, go and help someone. Give to the poor. Feed the hungry. That is how you will make me happy. Richard lowered the letter slowly. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. His face was wet with tears. The room felt heavier, colder, quieter, like something had just passed through it. He looked around slowly. Mama, he whispered. His voice echoed faintly in the small room. I am here now. Silence, then a soft sound. Richard froze. It came from behind him, near the door, and a faint movement, like cloth brushing against wood. He turned slowly, his heart pounding. Thump, thump, thump. The doorway was still open. The light from outside poured in faintly. But for a second, just a second, he thought he saw something, a shape, a figure, standing there, still, watching. His breath caught. Mama? He whispered. The shape did not move. Then the wind blew, the cloth by the window shifted, and the doorway became empty again. Nothing there. Just light, just dust, just silence. Richard stared for a long moment. Then slowly, he looked down at the letter again. His hands tightened around it. His voice broke as he spoke. You still loved me. He shook his head slowly. I didn't deserve it. Outside, the villagers began to murmur softly. Parsul stepped closer to the door. Richard, he called gently. Are you okay? Richard did not answer immediately. He stood up slowly, the letter still in his hand. His face had changed. The pain was still there, deep, sharp. But something else had joined it, something new, something quieter. Understanding. He walked toward the door, step by step. Then he stopped at the entrance. The sunlight touched his face. He looked at the villagers, then back at the grave, then down at the letter again. My mother, he said slowly, his voice shaking but clear, was waiting for me, even when I did not deserve it. No one spoke. They listened. Because this was no longer just a man crying. This was a man waking up. Richard swallowed hard. She asked me to help people. Parsul nodded slowly. That is who she was, he said. Even when she had little, she gave. Richard closed his eyes briefly, and then opened them again. I will do it, he said. But even as he said those words, a strange feeling passed through him, a feeling he could not explain, like something had just begun, not ended. His fingers tightened around the letter, and suddenly he remembered something Loretta had said, before she ran away, a sentence he had ignored at the time, a sentence that now returned clearly. She had looked at him, afraid for the first time, and she said, Richard, Your mother is not what you think, but she is also not ordinary. His heartbeat increased again. He turned slowly and looked back into the dark room behind him. The air inside felt different, still, watching, waiting, and deep inside him, a quiet fear began to grow. What if, what if there was more to his mother's story, more than he ever knew, or more than anyone ever told him? He swallowed hard, and just as he took a step away from the door, a soft whisper brushed past his ear. So light, he almost thought he imagined it. But he heard it, clear, gentle, familiar. Richard. He froze, his whole body stiff, slowly, very slowly. He turned back, his eyes wide, his heart racing, and this time he was sure. He was not alone. Richard. The whisper was soft, gentle, but it did not feel like imagination. It felt real, too real. Richard's body froze, his breath stopped halfway in his chest. Slowly, very slowly, he turned back toward the dark room. "Mama," he whispered. No answer, only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, the kind that makes your thoughts louder than they should be. His eyes scanned the room again, the bed, the table, the window. Nothing moved. Nothing stood there, yet the feeling remained, strong, watching, waiting. Richard's chest rose and fell slowly. Then, just as quickly as the moment came, it passed. The air felt lighter again. The room returned to what it was. Empty. Still. Quiet. He swallowed hard, then turned and stepped outside. The villagers looked at him immediately. They could see it on his face. Something had changed. Not just grief. Not just regret. Something deeper. "What did you see?" Kunle asked. Richard shook his head slowly. I don't know." Pasul studied him carefully, then nodded. "Some things are not for many ears," he said softly. Richard looked at the old man. There was wisdom in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of watching life unfold and knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Richard exhaled slowly, then looked at the grave again. The letter still rested in his hand. "My mother asked me to help people," he said quietly. Mama Tunda nodded. "That is the only thing she truly loved," she said, "giving, even when she had nothing." Richard closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I will do it," he said. This time his voice was firmer, but inside him a storm was still raging. That evening the sun began to set slowly over the village. The sky turned orange, then deep gold. Shadows stretched across the dusty compound. Richard sat quietly outside the mud house. The villagers had left one by one, some with sympathy, some with silence, but all of them, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his past. A small lantern burned beside him. The air was cooler now. Crickets began their night song. Richard leaned back against the wall of the house. The same house he once avoided, the same house his mother never left. He looked at his hands, still dusty, still shaking slightly. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I don't deserve forgiveness." The words hung in the air, then faded. Time passed. Minutes, maybe hours. He did not count. He just sat there, thinking, remembering, breaking. Later that night, he lay inside the mud house, on the same bed, under the same weak roof. The lantern had gone out. Darkness filled the room, but sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, memories came, his mother's voice, her smile, her patience, her loneliness. He turned to his side, then to the other, still no sleep. Then finally, slowly, his eyes closed, and the dream came. And he was standing in the same compound, but it looked different, brighter, clean, alive. The mud house stood strong, the zinc roof looked new, the ground was swept neatly. And there, under the mango tree, was his mother, Madame Bisi. She sat on a wooden stool, just like she used to, her wrapper tied neatly, her face calm, her eyes soft. Richard froze. "Mama," he whispered. His voice trembled, but this time she answered. "Richard." Her voice, the same, warm, gentle, alive. He ran toward her, fast, like a child who had been lost for years. "Mama, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he cried, falling to his knees before her. His hands reached for her, afraid she might disappear. Afraid this was not real, but she did not move away. She looked at him quietly. Tears filled his eyes. "I was wrong. I left you. I believed lies. I didn't come when you called me." His voice broke again. "I came too late." There was a long pause. Then Madame Bisi lifted her hand, slowly, gently, and placed it on his head. The touch felt real, warm, familiar, like home. "Look at me," she said softly. Richard raised his face. Her eyes met his. There was no anger there, no blame, only something that made his chest ache even more. "Love. I have forgiven you," she said. The words were simple, but they shook him deeply. Richard blinked. You have?" he asked, almost afraid. She nodded. "Yes." A tear rolled down his cheek. "But after everything I did." She smiled faintly. "You are my son." That was all. No long speech, no harsh words, just truth, the kind that breaks you and heals you at the same time. Richard shook his head slowly. "I don't deserve it." Madame Bissi's hand remained on his head. "Forgiveness is not about what you deserve," she said. "It is about what love chooses to give." Richard's breathing became uneven. He lowered his head again. "I wish I came earlier." There was a pause. Then she spoke again. "I waited." His chest tightened. "I know. But you did not come." The words were not harsh, but they were heavy. Real. Richard closed his eyes. Pain spread through him again. "I'm sorry." Another pause. Then Madame Bisi gently lifted his chin. "Listen to me carefully, Richard." He looked at her. Her face had changed slightly, still kind, but now serious. "There are consequences for every choice we make." Richard swallowed. "I know." She shook her head slowly. "No, you are just beginning to understand." The air around them shifted slightly, the brightness dimmed, just a little. "You chose to turn away from your roots," she continued. "You chose to ignore your conscience. You chose silence, when you should have spoken." Each word landed slowly, deep. "But Mama, I've changed," Richard said quickly. "I want to make it right." "You will try," she said. Not harsh, not cold, just certain. Richard's heart beat faster. "What does that mean?" Madame Bisi looked at him carefully. "Your wealth will not return." The words fell like stones. Richard froze. "What?" "You will start again," she said, "from the beginning." His chest tightened. "But everything I built is gone," she said calmly. Silence. Richard stared at her. His mind raced. "My company, my houses, my accounts, all gone." His breathing became uneven again. "But why?" Madame Bissi's eyes softened slightly. "Because some lessons must be lived, not just understood." Richard shook his head slowly. Tears filled his eyes again. "I have already lost you. Is that not enough?" Her expression softened again. "I did not give you this consequence." He frowned. "Then who did?" She looked at him quietly, then said softly, "Your own choices did." The words sank deep, heavy, unavoidable. Richard lowered his head. He had no answer, because somewhere inside him, he knew it was true. The deals he ignored, the people he trusted blindly, the warnings he dismissed, all of it. He had been too distracted, too comfortable, too blind. And now, everything had fallen apart. He whispered, "What do I do now?" Madame Bessi's hand left his head slowly. "You live," she said. He looked up. "You give," she added. His breath steadied slightly. "You help those who cannot help themselves." Tears rolled down his face again. "And maybe," she continued softly, "your heart will become whole again." Richard nodded slowly. "I will do it, I promise." Madame Bisi smiled faintly. "I know." There was a long pause. Then the light around them began to fade. "Mama, don't go," Richard said quickly, reaching for her, but she was already becoming distant. "Remember who you are," she said. Her voice grew softer. "And never forget where you come from." "Mama!" He reached out again. Richard woke up suddenly. His body jerked upright. His heart raced. His chest rose and fell quickly. The room was dark again. The mud house. The bed. The silence, all real. He looked around. No one. Nothing. But his face was wet with tears. He wiped them slowly, then looked down at his hands, still shaking. "It was a dream," he whispered. But deep inside him, it did not feel like just a dream. It felt like a message, a warning, a goodbye. He swallowed hard, then slowly stood up and stepped outside. The early morning light was just beginning to rise. The grave stood in front of the house, still, silent. But something inside him had changed, something final. He looked at the grave and whispered, "I understand now." But just as he said those words, a loud sound came from the road outside. A vehicle, fast, unfamiliar. Richard turned sharply. Dust rose as the car approached the compound. The engine roared, then stopped suddenly. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Unserious. Dressed in dark clothes. One of them looked straight at Richard, then said in a firm voice, "Richard Olalekan?" Richard's heart skipped. "Yes." The man stepped forward. "We have orders to bring you in." The air went cold again. Richard frowned. "Bring me in? For what?" The man's eyes did not soften. "For questioning." A pause, then he added, "About your missing assets. And a financial case that now has your name on it." Richard froze. Everything inside him tightened again. "What?" The man took another step closer. "Sir, this is bigger than you think." Richard's heart began to race again. The dream, the warning, the consequences, everything suddenly felt real, too real. And as the men moved closer to him, one thought echoed loudly in his mind. Had everything truly just begun? "Sir, you need to come with us." The man's voice was calm, too calm. Richard stood still in the dusty compound, his mind racing. The early morning light stretched across the grave, across the mud house, across everything he had just begun to understand. And now, this. A case, his name, his assets, everything tightening around him at once. He swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said slowly. The man nodded. "You can explain that at the station." Two other men stood behind him, silent, watching. Not aggressive, but firm. There was no escape in their posture. Richard looked back at the grave. His mother's grave. Still, silent. He took a deep breath, then nodded. "I'll come." The journey to town felt longer than it should. The road was rough. Dust rose behind the vehicle. Richard sat quietly in the back seat. And no handcuffs, no shouting. But something heavier than chains sat on his chest. Fear, not the loud kind, the quiet one. The one that comes when life begins to collapse. Piece by piece, his mind replayed the dream, his mother's voice, "Your wealth will not return." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. At the station, everything felt official. Cold, serious, a desk, files, voices speaking in low tones. He was asked to sit. He waited. Minutes passed. Then a man in a suit entered. He carried a file. Thick, heavy. He sat across from Richard. "Mr. Richard Olalekan," he said. Richard nodded. "Yes." The man opened the file. "You are aware your former wife, Loretta, has been detained and deported back to Nigeria." Richard's chest tightened. "Yes, I heard." The man nodded. "Good. And that makes this easier." He flipped a page. "Before she fled the country, she transferred large sums of money from your accounts to several foreign accounts." Richard clenched his jaw. "I did not authorize that." "We know," the man said calmly. Richard blinked. "You know?" The man looked up. "Yes. But here is the problem." He pushed the file slightly forward. "Your name is still attached to those transactions." Richard's stomach dropped. "But I didn't." "I believe you," the man said, raising a hand slightly. A pause. Then he added, "But the system does not believe feelings. It follows records." Silence. Richard stared at the table. His breathing slowed. Heavy, controlled. What does that mean? He asked quietly. The man leaned back slightly. It means your accounts are frozen. Richard closed his eyes. It hit him hard. All of them? He asked. All of them. His chest tightened. My properties? Under investigation. My company? Collapsed. The words came one after another, simple, direct, final. Richard leaned back slowly. The chair creaked under him. Everything. Gone. Just like that. He let out a slow breath. Not anger, not shouting, just acceptance. The man watched him carefully. You're taking this calmly. Richard nodded slowly. I was warned. The man frowned slightly. By who? Richard paused, then said quietly, My mother. The man said nothing. He simply closed the file. There will be a court process, he said, but for now you are not under arrest. You are free to go. But you are being monitored. Richard nodded. I understand. He stood up slowly, then paused. Sir, he said. The man looked up. Gia, yes? Richard swallowed. If someone loses everything, can they start again? The man studied him for a moment, then said, Yes. A pause. But not the same way. Richard nodded. Thank you. Days passed, then weeks. Life did not wait. It moved, slowly, quietly, but it moved. Richard returned to Lagos, but not to his old house. That house was gone, sold, seized, empty. Instead, he found a small room. One room, in a quiet part of the city. No marble floors, no chandeliers, no air conditioning humming in the background. Just a bed, a chair, and silence. The first night, he sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his hands, the same hands that once signed million-naira deals. Now, empty. He smiled slightly, not a happy smile, but a real one. I understand now, he whispered. The next morning, he began, small, simple, a real. He walked through the streets, not as a rich man, not as a businessman, just as a man. He bought bread, water, shared it with a boy sitting by the roadside. The boy looked at him, surprised. Why? The boy asked. Richard paused, then smiled softly. Because someone once taught me to give. The boy smiled back, and for the first time in a long while, Richard felt something. Peace. Days turned into weeks, weeks into 2. And just as the story had begun to shift, news came. Loretta. The courtroom was quiet, serious, cold. Richard sat in the front row. Not as the powerful man he once was, but as a witness, as a victim, as a man learning. Loretta stood in front. She looked different, very different. The expensive clothes were gone, the confidence gone. Her face looked tired, worn, or like someone who had run too far, and finally stopped. The judge spoke. Loretta James, you have been found guilty of financial fraud, identity manipulation, and illegal transfers. Silence filled the room. You are ordered to refund 10 million naira to the complainant. Richard blinked slowly. 10 million. A small part of what was taken. The judge continued, and you will serve a sentence as determined by the court. Loretta's shoulders dropped. Then she looked up. Her eyes found Richard. For a moment, everything stood still. No anger, no shouting. Just regret. Deep regret. Her lips moved slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Richard looked at her, and for a second, he saw it. Not the woman who ruined his life, but the broken human, who destroyed herself. He nodded slowly, not in forgiveness, not yet. But in understanding. The guards led her away, and just like that. Her chapter ended. Outside the court, Richard stood quietly. The sun was bright, the world looked normal, but he knew nothing was the same anymore. He looked up at the sky, then closed his eyes briefly. Mama, he whispered, I'm trying. Months later, the mud house was no longer the same. The compound had been cleaned, the walls repaired, the roof fixed. Not a mansion, not luxury, but respect, love. Richard stood in front of the grave again. This time, he did not collapse. He stood, still, calm. He placed fresh flowers gently on the grave, then sat down beside it. I helped someone today, he said softly. A pause. Then two people. A small smile. I think you would have liked them. The wind blew gently, soft, warm. And for a moment, he felt it again. That quiet presence, not scary, not heavy, just there. He exhaled slowly. I'm starting again, he said. No shortcuts. No lies. Just life. Sometimes we don't lose things suddenly. We lose them slowly, through silence, through wrong choices, through ignoring the people who truly matter. Richard's biggest mistake was not just leaving his mother, it was choosing comfort over truth. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.